Hey, this is Jacob with Westcott. In this video, we're going to break down some lighting setups we used on a recent commercial shoot. We were shooting a commercial for Laibe Electric here in Toledo, Ohio. So big shout out to them for letting us capture this and get behind the scenes and everything of the different lighting setups we did. For this shoot, we were a small crew, just me and a couple others, capturing interviews, B-roll at their offices, and work sites. So if you're a solo shooter or working with minimal help, this should hopefully give you some practical lighting setups that are pretty fast and easy to do. Let's get into it. So we ended up starting out with the interview setups because it helped dictate some of the B-roll coverage we were going to shoot later in the day. A great location can do a lot of work for you, especially when you aren't on a big budget shoot. In this interview setup, I saw a really beautiful beam of sunlight coming through a window, and I loved how it looked, and I knew we just needed to shoot the interview there. And especially since it was a shorter interview, I wasn't worried about the light beam moving and causing continuity issues because we were just filming with her for a few minutes. But if you were shooting a longer interview, I would say obviously avoid things like that because that can cause those continuity issues of even just disappearing halfway through the interview. And especially with that amount of light coming in, it can really affect your ambient lighting quite a bit. So this is how our setup looks before we add lighting. Obviously, we would not shoot the interview like this because there is not a lot of shape to the light of the scene. It just looks bad. The light on her face is just very flat. The background is just way too bright, and we completely lose that really beautiful shape of sunlight. For our key light, we used a 2x3 rapid box switch with the L120-B, and then we added an egg crate grid to the front to help control the spill of light so it wasn't hitting the background. This was especially important because she was wearing a lighter colored shirt, and then the background was lighter as well. So we definitely wanted that background to stay darker than her so she wouldn't blend into it. We could have stopped there, but I knew I wanted a little more separation from the background. So I added a 1x3 rapid box switch to the left side of the frame. This gave her a nice hair light and added a subtle kick of light to the far side of her face. And just like the key light, I did add a grid to this as well for the same reason. I just didn't want light to spill on the background. So we got a really cool look out of this interview just by exposing for our background, getting it to where we liked it, and then adding in our lights to add that separation so she looks like she belongs in the scene. Again, this is where we started, and then this is how it ended up. So after the interview, we grabbed some B-roll around their offices of people working, walking down hallways, just the usual stuff you typically get for a corporate video like this. And for these shots, my go-to setup for this, what I absolutely loved, was our L120-B with a rapid box lantern. I love using the lantern in situations like this because it's really forgiving and it spreads light in all directions. So it lights your subjects and backgrounds pretty evenly. I like to think of it kind of like a portable lampshade you can just take anywhere, any place. For the first setup, we were in Mike's office. The overhead lights looked flat and underexposed his face. So we chose to turn those off and just use the L120-B with the lantern. By getting the light really close to him, we could bring the exposure up on his face while darkening the background for just more contrast. Plus, we had this really nice, cool light coming in from the windows in the background, which added some really good color contrast from the edge of his face. And you really noticed it, especially on these close-ups where you have some of these blue hues mixed with some of these warmer tones. And as far as dialing that light in, it was just seeing that outside was kind of like a colder, overcast day. So I just warmed up the light a little bit and then set my white balance to what my light was at, which was, I believe, around 4,700 Kelvin. And then the light coming in was closer to like a 6,000 Kelvin. So just that alone gave us those bluer tones coming in. And it's just a really great natural look. And I like that for some moodier shots. Now, something that you do see with this setup that I really, really like, I was lucky enough to have an assistant there who could hold this and carry it around, and we did run it all off of battery power, which is amazing. So the L120-B you can run off of a V-mount battery, which is really nice if you're using it in a setup like this where we had it attached to a paint pole and we had a battery clamp to the paint pole. So we had a nice mobile light setup that we could just move around, and I could boss my assistant around to put it in places where we needed it. We also did a walking shot in one of the hallways with Mike and Kendra, the same light, same lantern. we had it in a mobile setup, so we were able to just like carry it down the hallway and figure out where we wanted to be with it. And we weren't setting up light stands, finding house power. We were able to just carry it down the hallway. So even if you're in a well-lit office like we were here, the existing lights don't always give you the most flattering look. They're usually overhead and create shadows where you typically don't want shadows. So having your own light source like this is just one way to give you even more control. So walking down the hallway, we were able to position it much lower than what the overhead lights were, and we were able to follow Mike and Kendra as they were walking down the hallway and just keep that light very even versus the overhead lights. As you're moving between one and the other, you're typically going to have shadows casting over and changing from light to light, where this was much more even and stayed on their face and kept them with even lighting as they walked. And then finally, we filmed at a job site where there was someone installing different electrical components. This space that we were filming in did have overhead lights in some places, and some places it was still a work area where that wasn't hooked up yet. So obviously in a situation like that, you're gonna want your own light. So we brought our own light as well, which was the same L120-B. This time I didn't use a softbox modifier, I used the included reflector with it. So in these setups, I bounced the light off the ceiling and nearby walls to create some soft and natural looking lighting without it feeling too artificial. When you're bouncing light off of walls, there are two big things to keep in mind. One, the color of the surface does matter, because if you bounce off of a blue or green wall, you're gonna get blue or green tints to your light, which is not that easy to color correct later, especially if you have other ambient light mixing in the frame as well. So be aware of that and look for, obviously going into these situations, I knew we had either a white ceiling or a white wall we were bouncing off of, and that worked out great for our use case. Two, you do lose some control when you're bouncing light. Bounce light spreads everywhere. It's not ideal if you do want moody lighting or tight control on the background. But if you're in a tight space and you need a large amount of light that you can't necessarily fit like a modifier into, if you want like a big 48-inch softbox and you're in a little 6x6 room, you might not have the space to bring that big softbox in there and be able to move around and capture that coverage. So bouncing light off a wall is great for that, because you can bounce it off a wall and it gives you way more light in that little space. One of the things, especially on this work site, that obviously was invaluable was being able to run off of battery power. Sometimes going into a situation, you don't know if the location has power, especially if you're at a work site or something like that where there is active construction. You might not be able to run long cords all over the place because there's crews working and things like that. One of the benefits of having a portable light like this on battery is typically when I'm getting coverage, like for example, on this work site, I was moving in for close-ups and wides and getting different angles and being able to have just one light in the room to just move around. So when I moved to like a more extreme angle, like where I was shooting straight up, it was nice to be able to just move that light back out of the way and not have, a bunch of different pieces of equipment or pull cords or anything like that. It was nice being able to have just a simple light setup that we had on a light stand, and we just carried it around the different work areas. Like on any shoot, I think it's so important that you need to be flexible. For example, on this one, I didn't really have any prior knowledge of what we were filming or what we were going to shoot when we got to the work site. So I just knew I wanted to stay as light as possible and have battery power, and obviously we had extra stuff in, the trunk of our car if we needed more lights or anything like that. But I think being able to go into a situation and have all of these different tools at your disposal is so important, because as a professional, you need to be ready for anything that your client's going to throw at you. I know we covered a lot today, so if you have any questions about it, leave a comment down below and we'll get back to you. And thank you so much for watching.